Alright guys, and welcome back to my Python tutorials for beginners. In this tutorial I'm going to teach you about Python conditional statements, how to work with the if statement, the Elif statement, the else statement, and the nested if statement. So open your PyDroid and click on this file icon to create new coding environment, and here we are. So what is conditional statement in Python or in programming at large? The conditional statements are used to perform or handle different logical conditions which are based on decision making, whether a certain Boolean or logical condition is true or false. So conditional statement is based on decision making, and they consider whether a certain condition is true or false before the code will be executed based on the certain condition or decision that is taken or given to the program. And there are different forms or types of conditional statements in Python, which we are going to consider in the course of this tutorial. And so be attentive and follow up with practices. So we have the if conditional statement, we have the if else, and we have the elif, and then we have the nested if, and so on. But in this tutorial we are going to revolve our learning within these four types of conditional statement, which are the necessary ones as well, and the most important and commonly used. And so let's talk about the if statement now. The if statement, it has only one block of code or condition, and the if statement will execute the line of code within each block based on whether a certain condition is met or true. What do I mean? Let me come down and create my variable. So I'll call my variable num1. Let me say num1, then equals, let me give it any number, let's say 7, and then I'll create num2, then I'll give it any number as well. Let me use 10, and then use 17 here. You can use any number. So I'll come then and use the if statement. This is what we call conditional statement. We are going to give a condition to these two variables we have created now, and we have assigned the values to them. So we'll now say if num1, let's say num1, if num1 is greater than num2, if num1 is greater than num2, then the syntax for writing the if condition is you give the condition, use the keyword if. You can see the color changes because it's a keyword. So you use the word if, then you give the condition. The condition we gave here is num1 greater than what? Num2. That's the condition. Then after this condition, you put colon at the front of the condition. That's the syntax for the if statement. Then you now come down and then give what should be executed. Then we will come down and say print if num1 is greater than num2, then print num1 is greater than num2. Num1, let's say num1 is greater than num2. Num1 is greater than num2. So if I run my program, I'm going to run my program. Alright, so if I run my program, you see the result. Alright, you can see the outcome here. You see num1 is greater than what? Num2, because actually the data we stored in num1 is greater than the value we stored in num2. That's how it works. So if I change this num1 to, let's say, something 8, if we change it to 8, you see the result. Nothing will be printed because there was no condition given for any value that is less than num1. Is it understood? So this condition will only be executed when we have num1 to be greater than num2. Is it understood? So if we change the condition, let's leave it 8, then we'll change this condition to be less than. Let's use less than here instead of greater than. Then we'll now change this to be less than so that it will match the code as well. Less than. Okay. If we run the code, we see what will happen. You see num1 is less than what? Num2. And if we use greater than a greater number here, let's say 45, nothing will be printed at the output. Nothing is printed because of what? That's the only condition that was met. What if we say less than or equal to? We will say less than or equal to. Let's try and print and see what comes. You see nothing is printed as well. So this is the basis of the if statement. So you can see the condition is executed because it's true, and you see when it was not true, there was no execution of this block of code within this if statement. So that is basically how it works. So we can do something like this as well. Let's create a list of objects. Just quickly create a list of objects. Let me say list1, then equals list1 equals, then normally how to create list. I've taught you guys how to create list, and so list1 equals, let me use any random color, let's say blue. Okay, blue and blue, green, all right, sorry, blue, green, and then red. Okay, that's our list, and that's the object we have in our list now. We'll now come here and give a condition that we are going to check if a particular object exists in this list. We'll now say if blue, let's check if blue exists. If blue in list1, if blue in list1, print the color is in our list. If I run the program, you can see the color is in our list. You see the result, the outcome. But if I use let's say a color that is not in our list, let me use orange. If I print it, you see nothing is going to be printed. You can see nothing is printed at the output because this particular color or object is not an object in our list. So this is basically how the if statement works, and how it executes code within its blocks. And so we now move on to the if else statement. The if else statement contains two conditions. Remember, the if statement contains only one condition. Only one condition was given here. Let me show you what I mean. So the if else statement will contain the if block and the else block. This is the else block, else, and this is its syntax. So you write the else keyword and then put colon directly at the front of that else, then come down to print what you want the code to execute at the output. And so the if else statement contains two conditions, the if block and the else block, and it is used for decision making such that if the condition within the block is met or true, and then the program will be executed. But if the condition is not true, that is, if the condition within the if block is not true, then the compiler will skip the program in the if block and execute the program in the else block. So we'll say if orange is in list1, we'll say print the color is in our list. Now what if this line of code is not true? We should skip the line of code in the if block and come to execute that in the else block. And so we'll say else print the color is not in our list. Do you see the syntax for writing else statement? That's the syntax. So if I run the program, let's see, you can see the color is not in our list. So the if block of code was skipped because it's not true. Then the else line of code was executed because it's true. Now if we change this, let's use an object that is in our list here now. Let's say green. Okay, then if I run the program, you see the if line of code be executed. You can see the color is in our list. So this is basically how to work with the if and the if else statement. Is it understood? And so we move further. Let's move on to the Elif statement, the if and the Elif and else statement. The if, Elif and else statement contains three conditions: the if block, the Elif block, and the else block. So if the condition in the if block is not met or true, it will skip to execute the program in the Elif block. But if the condition in the Elif block is not met as well, or is not true, then the compiler will skip the line of code in the if block and also the Elif block and go to execute the program in the else block. How does that happen? Let's define variable num1, then we assign any value to it, 45, and then num2, then we'll assign a value to it. Let's use 23. Alright, then we'll now give a condition. We say if num1 is greater than num2, print num1 is greater than num2. Elif, this is the Elif statement. The Elif statement syntax is the same as the if statement syntax. So now come here and say Elif num1 less than num2. Elif num1 less than num2, then put your column, that's its syntax. Then come down and print num1. I say num1 is not greater than num2. Num1 is not greater than num2. Alright, this is the Elif block of code. Now then we'll now come down and write our else condition. This is the syntax for else. Then come down and print num1 is equal to num2. Print num1 is equal to num2. So I want to just go through this code, consider it. We define our variable num2, and then num1 and num2. We define our variable num1 and num2, and then we assign 45 into num1 and assign 43 into num2. And then we come here and give a condition that if num1 is greater than num2, if num1 is greater than num2, then the program should execute that num1 is actually greater than what? Num2. But if num1 is not greater than num2, then the compiler should skip this if block of code and come to execute the Elif block of code, that is num2. That is if num1 less than num2, then it should execute num1 is not greater than what? Num2. Then if these two conditions, the if and the Elif condition, are not true and they are not met, then the compiler will skip these two blocks of code and come to execute the else condition, the else block of code. That is, it should print num1. It should print num1 is equal to num2. You can see it here. So these are the conditions we gave. These are to write the if, the Elif, and the else statement. So if I run my program now, take note of the numbers we stored in the num1 and num2. Take note of them. Let's see which one will be executed. Okay, you can see num1 is greater than what? Num2. Now let's change num2. Okay, let's leave the 23. Let's change num1 to be less than. Let's use a number less than num2 here. Alright, 12 and 23. You can see num1 is not greater than what? Num2. The Elif block of code is executed here. That first one was the if block of code that was executed. So if we change it to be equal, the else block of code will be executed. Let's use 23. We can, if I run my program, you see num1 is equal to what? Num2, which is what? The else block of code. Is it understood? So this is basically how to work with the if, the Elif, and the else statement. We also have the nested if statement. This nested if statement is an if statement that is written within another if statement. That's why we call it nested if statement. it is an if statement in another if statement. So it's like a sub if statement within a main if statement. So how is that done? Let's write our program again. We have created num1 to be equal to 23, or let's change the value to be 80 thereabout, and then use another variable here, 56. You can retain the value for which, but just practice this and get used to them. So let's say if num1 greater than num2, we are going to remove this elif here. We don't need it again. Then we'll say if num1 is greater than num2. This line of code is known as the outer if. It's not the outer if. Let me give a comment so you understand better. Outer if. So this is the outer if statement. Then the second one, which is the nested if, is known as the inner if statement. Then you now give your indentation. We now write another if statement inside this if statement, which is the nested if num1 equal to num2, and your column as usual. Come then and print num1 is equal to num2. This is what we call nested if statement. And we also have the nested else. So after this other line of code, now we now come down and write its else. The else is like a closure of this opening if. So it's like closing this opening if block of conditions. So if I now come down and write its else, this other else is for this nested if. So it's also called nested else. So you come down and write else, print num1 is greater than num2, else print num1 is greater than num2. Print inside the main else statement that else print num1 is less than num2. Print num1 is less than num2. So just go through the line of code and understand better what it means here. Let me explain it again. This if num1 is greater than num2, if the statement is true that num1 is greater than num2, then we'll skip this nested if and come to execute the program. Will come to execute this nested else that num1 is greater than what num2. But if that is not the case, if num1 is less than num2, that is the vice versa, then we'll skip the first if statement, the nested if statement, and then come to execute the main else statement, this last else here. But if that is not the case, then the first nested if, the nested if itself after the main if, num1 equal to num2, should be executed. So if I run my program, take note of the value we stored in num1 and num2. Num1 is 80 and num2 is 56. So num1 is actually greater than num2. So if we run our program, let's see which one will be executed. You can see num1 is equal to what? Num2. Which line of code was executed here? Num1 is equal to num2. You can see is the nested if that was executed. The nested if is what executed. The main if was skipped, the nested else was skipped, and the main else was skipped, and the nested if was executed. So let's change it now. Let's change this. Let's make num1 to be less than num2, and then run our program. All right, let's use 45, 46. Okay, so if I run my program, you can see num1 is less than num2. Which line of code was executed here? Num1 is less than num2. Is the main else statement that was executed. This last at the down here, the main else statement was executed. So the nested if and the nested else and the main if was skipped because they are not certain. Is it understood? Because actually num1 is less than what? Num2. So if we make them equal, alright, so let's put num1 greater than or equal to here, num1 greater than or equal to num2. Then if we come down, just go through the code again. Alright, so if we come down and print, you can see num1 is equal to what? Num2, as we use the same value for the 2. So when we use the same value for the 2, you can see that the nested if statement is executed because they are equal. So if we run a program, you can see num1 is equal to what? Num2. But if num1 is greater than, you see which one will be executed. Num1 is greater than what? Num2. So the nested else was executed. Then if the reverse, that's if num2 is greater than, you see num1 is less than what? Num2, which is true. So it's the last else that was executed. And when they are the same, the nested if will be executed. You can see num1 is equal to what? Num2. So this is basically how conditional statement works in Python. And so let's do a very simple project before we round off this section. I'm going to remove all this. Then let's do a very simple project. Let's write a simple program that can detect whether a certain number entered by the user is positive or negative. So how can we do that? Let's use okay, let's define a variable. You can name it anything. Let's say my var equals, then we'll now use the int. I have told us the reason for this int in our previous tutorial. Int, then input, because we are going to accept number from our user, not strings. That's why we use this int to convert everything that the user will enter to integer and not a string. Enter any number. Let's use the new tab. Okay, then we'll ask our user to enter any number. Then from here we'll now determine if the number is positive or negative. How do we do that? Let's give a condition. Let's say if my var equals or greater than or equals 0, if my var greater than or equals 0, okay, something like this, then come down, put a column, come down and print, you entered a positive number. Will return to the user and tell the user you entered a positive number. Alright, but if it's not true, if the number entered by our user is not positive, then we'll now use the else statement. We'll tell the compiler will skip the if line of code, the if block, and come to execute the else block. So now say, let's use new tab here as well. Alright, then we'll now say else print, then our new tab, print you entered a negative number. Alright, so this is that. Just go through the code and understand it better. Is it gotten? So if I run my program now, you can see enter any number. If I enter 12, you can see you entered a positive number. So let me go and run my code again. Let me use negative number now. Negative 12, you can see you entered a negative number. So this is a simple program that can determine or can detect whether a number is positive or negative. And also you can detect whether a number is even or odd by just changing this number. You can just change this and say if my var, then modulus. In our previous tutorial we learned about operators. So this is the modulus operator, and I told us what it's all about. if my var modulus 2, that is any number divisible by 2 and the remainder is 0, if that's what is the modular operator is used for. So if my var modulo 2 equals 0, double of this equal to is what is called equals here, is equal 0, then print you entered an even number. Print you entered an even number. Alright, else if it's not true, if it's not so, then print you entered an odd number. So if I run my program now, you can see enter any number. So if I enter 3, what is 3? 3 is actually an odd number, so you can see you enter an odd number. If I run the program again and enter 4, 4 is an even number, so you can see you entered an even number. So this is basically how it works. If I enter 12, 12 is an even number, you entered an even what number. What if I enter 13, which is an a odd number? You can see it's an odd number, so you entered what. So this is basically how it works, guys. Just practice this and get used to them, and then we progress in our Python tutorials. See you at the top and see you in the next tutorial. Please do well to subscribe to my channel and